I grew up in a Georgian household with my mum and my older brother. As far as I could remember, I would see things that my mum and my older brother could not when I was little. There was a little boy and there was an old angry man. The little boy was afraid of the angry man, and we used to play games of hide and seek. I want to point out that at this time I would have been about 7 years old. My parents thought I was playing games when I told them about the angry man chasing us. I would occasionally see other things too, apparitions, shadow movement, which did scare me, but over the years I became more accustomed to seeing odd things. I did have problems sleeping. Sometimes I'd wake in the night after having a nightmare and would struggle to go back to sleep. My dad worked late, and he got upset if I woke him and mum. I guess he thought I was still playing games when I told him there was something in my room. My mum would often leave my bedside light on, as this helped me sleep. I was pretty scared of the dark at that age. One time, I woke up in the middle of the night. I was tired as I'd done a physical at school that day, as I was in the school football team. I remember looking at my clock. It was 4:06 AM. The sun was just starting to rise, and I could feel myself drifting back to sleep. I wrapped the covers around me and laid on my side, staring into the mirror next to my bed. I could feel myself drifting off when I noticed something odd in the mirror. My eyes were still not clear, so I rubbed them and I realised I was looking at something in my room. It was white, it had a face, and it was standing behind me, right next to my bed. I froze. I'd never seen anything like it before. I was laying down on my side, watching this apparition through the mirror. I could make out details of its face. Its eyes were black. It was wearing a white overall, which seemed to glow white. I wanted to turn and run to my mum, but I couldn't move my body. I didn't dare move. I kept my body still, pretending to be asleep. The apparition stood there for a minute or two before it disappeared. It just seemed to dissolve into air. All of the time I was froze in position. Even after it vanished, I had been in the same position for a while. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I hardly slept for the rest of the night. I don't think it meant me any harm. It was like it was watching over me, keeping me safe. I never saw it again, thankfully. But I had my mum remove the mirror from my bedroom after that night. About 18 years ago, I was a senior telecoms engineer. My role was to install new telephone lines, fix faults, and deal with escalations. My position meant that I would sometimes be on the road for a few days, but I enjoyed travelling and seeing new places. One day, I had to travel to a site to complete an install. The customer was looking to install 10 new lines, and they had signed a big contract for some other services. So the coordinator wanted me, as the most senior member of the team, to take the lead on this install. The site was 2.5 hours drive, a bit further than I'd usually travel, but it wasn't uncommon for me to travel further afield. I called the contact when I was 30 minutes away, and introduced myself. He was the site manager and explained that it would either be himself or the security guard who would give me access. He further explained that the building had some existing phone lines down in the cellar. I arrived on site and was greeted by the security guard. He was an older gentleman, about mid-50s. He was very cheerful, and we talked about various topics as he showed me around the building. The building was old. It was disused for several years and was being converted into offices. There were various builders and contractors on site. After the security guard signed me in and issued me with an ID badge and a walkie-talkie, he unlocked the door to the cellar. The site had virtually no phone reception on the lower levels, so walkie-talkies were used throughout the building. The door to the cellar was cast iron, and it was heavily rusted in parts. I followed the security guard down the cellar. The brick steps leading down to the space were worn and uneven in parts. We passed through a corridor of padlocked wooden doors before he stopped to turn on his flashlight. He apologised and explained that the lights ahead were not working due to an electrical fault, so we continued forwards. The corridor narrowed and it smelt really damp. The walls looked black and there were various service pipes overhead and on both sides of the corridor. I pulled out my phone and used the torch to get a good bearing on my surroundings. I can understand why they had electrical issues. The section we were in was covered in mould. We reached the end of the corridor where the existing telecoms cables entered the building. There was a single light in the area. I put my tester on the lines and confirmed there was a signal on 4 of the existing lines. The 5th line was dead. I measured and marked the holes ready for the new lines. I checked the size of the service pipe where the telephone lines come into the building. No problems, I thought. There was plenty of room for the additional lines. I headed back to my van to grab some tools and start the install. The security guard was called elsewhere on his radio and said he would be back in 10 minutes. I started drilling and installing the blocks. I managed to lay the first section of cables from outside and push them through, so I headed back to the cellar to terminate them and fit the rest of the sockets. You could hear movement throughout the cellar and the building. However, I almost jumped out my skin when I heard someone behind me ask what I'm doing. The light down there wasn't great, but I could see a woman dressed in robes with a mask on standing behind me. She looked like a cleaner. I explained that I was an engineer and I was fitting some new lines. I continued the install while we talked. She said her name was Mary and she was a cleaner. She didn't say much, but I welcomed the company. I finished drilling the holes and fitting the sockets, ready for the new lines. It was 5 o'clock and I was packing my tools away. I turned and Mary had gone. I had a look down the length of the corridor, but I saw no sign of her. The security guard returned, apologised for the wait, and escorted me back out of the cellar. He started to lock the doors behind us, which prompted me to ask about Mary. He paused and asked me if I believe in ghosts. I laughed. I thought he was pulling my leg. He went on to explain that Mary was a cleaner who died on site supposedly around 30 years ago. He just looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'm not lying. Mary passed away years ago. It's not something that's funny," telling me he had been mocked as he had also seen Mary, but people had never believed him. We lived in a house near Gettysburg with my dad, and we used to see apparitions all the time. Most of them used to be transparent. Usually you couldn't make out any particular details apart from a body outline or a disfigured shadow. I became interested in ghost hunting in my teen years, so it's always captivated me, but some of my friends would never step foot in my house, and I don't blame them. I don't think living with ghosts is as bad as people make out. You just learn to live with it, although we did have a fair few jump scares from time. One night I was laying on my bed reading when I heard a noise that sounded like my name being called. I called out, listened for a while, and then went back to reading. It was around 1 AM, and I usually read before bed. I noticed some movement out the corner of my eye. I turned and I saw this ghostly soldier moving very slowly across the hallway outside my bedroom. It made no noise as it moved, and it moved slowly. I could make out features of his uniform and the serious expression on his face. I watched it as it slowly walked across the hallway, not making a single sound. The floorboards outside my room creak and squeak from the slightest movement, so I concluded it was either not of solid mass or floating on the floor. I watched it as it moved down the hallway and walked right through a wall that leads to our storeroom. Being the curious soul I am, I opened the door to the store, but I couldn't find any traces of the soldier. I later learned that my dad had recently bought some old World War I medals from an antiques dealer. He was keeping them in the storeroom. My dad was quite particular about anyone touching his antiques. He kept them locked away under lock and key. I never really found antiques interesting, but the rebellious side of me always wanted to take a peek. Plus, it was no coincidence that the ghost of a soldier appeared. One weekend, my dad was out of town. I saw this as an ideal opportunity to bring the medal into my room, hoping to see the soldier another time. I also had a friend sleeping over, who I'd told this story to before. He was quite optimistic for the first few hours, but after no activity, we decided to put a movie on. The rest of the evening was quite eventless. There was the odd noise in the house, but nothing I'd call paranormal. It was late, and my friend was feeling rather confident that I'd made this story up. He didn't say anything, but I could tell. We stayed up pretty late. It was around 3 AM. My friend was using the futon in my room as a bed. My friend got up to use the bathroom. He was in there for only a few minutes when I heard him scream and come rushing into my room. I could see by the expression on his face he was serious. I wanted to laugh, but I maintained composure and asked him what was wrong. He said while he was in the bathroom, something whispered into his ear, as if someone was standing next to him. I tried reassuring him. I think he realised at this point there was truth to what I told him. I'm not sure who went first, but I guess we both fell asleep. The next thing I remember was waking to the sound of footsteps marching. I had left the bedside light on, and as I sat up, my friend was up too. This was a new experience for me, although I was glad something paranormal was happening. The marching sound continued. It sounded like there was a group of people marching outside my bedroom door. My friend was looking pale at this point. I got up and walked into the hallway. I could still hear the marching, but the hallway light was off. I was still a bit drowsy, but I could tell from the layout of the house it was coming from the stairs. As I reached for the light switch, the marching abruptly stopped. I checked the stairs and the landing. I waited a few minutes, but couldn't see or hear anything. I walked back into the room with a smug look on my face. My friend was still looking pale. I told him what happened. Nothing happened for the rest of the night, as far as I can tell. I woke up the following day, around noon. My friend was still snoring. I guess he didn't get much sleep last night.